Firstly, let's recap. In the previous session, we understood about the single page applications. We understood also about the multi-page applications. Then we have seen about routing. We have seen how to do routing using the React Router DOM. We understood the various components involved and how to achieve routing using them. Okay. Coming to today's session. So in today's session, we'll add some API calls, right? So we are going to use fetch and add API calls. And also we'll add a loader using a third-party package, React Loader Spinner. Okay. So to set the code breakdown for today's session, you need to run this command. So the necessary resources will get downloaded. Then run npm install. Then the dependencies will get installed. Okay. So now let's get started. So let's build a blog application. Okay. So there you can see, right? Previously, we have created the home, about, and contact components, right? So we have seen how to route between these components, right? So here, when it comes to home, we want to display a list of blog items. And by clicking on a particular blog item, so we want to display the blog. Okay, so the entire blog, the entire content of the blog, there you can see. So there are a list of blogs, right? So, and then on clicking a particular blog, we want to display the blog content. Okay, so this is what we want to achieve. Okay, so related to this, some pre-filled code is available for you. You can have a look at the folder structure there. So there are various components available, the header, and then there's blogs list, and there's blog item. So the blog list is the list of blogs, that component. And within that, we have the blog item. So that is blog item. So like this, there are various components already available for you. Okay, so let's have a look at this pre-filled code. So here, let's just have a look at this. So I'll just close these. So let's start. So here in the components, you can see there are various components here. There's about, blog item, blog list, and like this. Okay. So now coming to the app.js. Okay. This is where our logic is present. Okay. So there you can see we already have some routing present here, right? We have done this in the previous session. It's just the same. So in the browser router, then we have the header, and then in the switch, we have this where for the path slash. Right now we are rendering the blogs list. Okay. Previously we have rendered the home component, but now we want to show the list of blogs in the home. So we are rendering the blogs list component. Okay. So then for slash abouts, it's about, and then for slash contact, so the component is contact, and then for any other path, so we are displaying not found. Okay. Clear? So now let's once have a look at the blogs list component. Okay, so here in the blogs list component, so you can have a look at the index.js. So there you can see. So firstly, we have the blogs list component. So within that, we have a container, right? So then we are iterating over the blogs data. Okay, and then we are displaying the blog item for each of that. Okay, so here we have the blogs data. This is some dummy data that is already present. So we are iterating over each of these objects and displaying the blog item for each of that. Okay, there you can see. Okay, so this is what we are doing right now. Okay, so let's have a look at this output. So let me do npm start. So with this development server started. Okay, so now let's have a look at the output for this pre-filled code that we understood. So there you can see in the home. So we have some dummy data. So that's the reason we have the blog items in this manner. And then you can see there's about, this contact, all this we have seen in previous session. Coming to this, right? So we have some dummy data. So this is it. But actually the blogs items that we want to display here, we want to fetch that data from an API call and display it accordingly. Okay, so let's see how to do that. Okay. So we have seen this pre-filled code, and then we understood about this. So there's some dummy data. Based on that, we are displaying the blog items. So when we have done npm start, we were able to see an output in this manner. So as we understood right now, we have some dummy data and the output is in that manner. But actually, we want to get the blogs data by making an API call. So let's do that. Okay, so the steps involved in that are, firstly, we have to make the API call using fetch. We already have known about fetch, right? So using that, we have to make an API call. That's the step one. Okay, after that, so we'll get the blog data from the API call, right? So we have to set this blog data to the state. Why? Because based on that, appropriately, the entire component will be re-rendered, right? So based on the blog data that we get from the API, so we have to re-render the component. So we have to set it to the state. Okay, and then we also want to show a loader when the API call is in progress. Okay, so these are the steps involved. So firstly, let's start with making the API call using the fetch. Okay, so generally we make the API calls inside the component did mount. So in the mounting phase, so we understood that there are three different methods, right? So constructor, then render, and then finally the component did mount method will be called. So generally we make the API calls in the component did mount. So the reason is it won't block the render, right? So the render should happen as it is, and after that we'll make the API calls. So that's the reason we generally make API calls in the component did mount so that it won't block the render. Okay, so now in the component did mount, there you can see in the blogs list component, we have the component did mount method. So within that, we are making an API call. So this dot get blog data. So in that get blogs data, we are going to add the API call related code. Okay. So the API that we want to call is getBlocks API. Okay, so since we are fetching the data, the method is get, and coming to the URL, it is apis.ccbp.in/blocks. Okay, so this is the API URL. Okay, and then for this, the response would be the list of blocks. Okay, you can try to access this URL in the browser. So then you'll be able to see an output in this manner. Okay, so the URL is apis.ccbp.in/blocks. If you try to access it in the browser, you'll be able to see this output. Okay, so now let's start making the API call. Okay, so in the get blocks data, so firstly using the fetch, we have to provide the API URL. So we'll specify that. So using the fetch, we are fetching the response of that URL. So since it will return a promise object, we are awaiting on it. And finally, once the promise object is resolved, we'll get the response and we are storing it in the response variable. We are already familiar with this, right? So then we want to convert it to a JSON. So response.json, again, it's a promise object. So we wait on that. So wait, and then finally we'll get the JSON data, right? Okay, so now let's just print that data and have a look at the output. Okay, so shall we do these steps? Okay. So now coming to this part, so now we actually want to fetch the data from the API and then want to display, right? Right now we have some dummy data, but actually we want to get the blocks data by making an API call. Okay, so as we understood, we generally make the API call in the component did mount method. So component did mount. So in this, we'll make an API call. So let's write a method for that, get blocks data. So get blocks data would be an arrow function. So within this, we have to make the API call. So to make the API call, we can make use of the fetch, right? So fetch off, and we have to provide the URL. So the URL is https://apis.ccbp.in/blocks. So you can find this API URL in the resources.md file. You can see there's an N, there's a resources.md file. So if you open the preview, you can find the API here, right? So you can directly copy paste from here. Okay. So you need not memorize all of this. You can just access it from there. Okay. So with this, we are going to fetch. So since it will return a promise object, we'll await. So since we are using await, we have to write async here. So, and then we'll store the response. Okay. So now from the response, we want to convert that into a JSON. So constant data equal to await response.json. Again, it will return a promise object. We are awaiting on that. So now let's just display the data. Okay. So now let's inspect. Let's go to the console, right? So you can see the output there. So it's an array of blog items, right? There you can see. So within that, there's some data. There's author, there's author URL, ID, image URL, title, topic. Like this, we have some data for each of the blog item, right? There you can see, right? Okay. So appropriately, we have made the API call and then we have fetched the data, right? So now we have the data. Appropriately, based on this data, we have to render the UI, right? So let's proceed to that. Okay, so we got this data, right? So the next thing is we want to set this block data to the state. So once we set this, the entire component will be re-rendered and we'll be able to see the output, right? So we have to set this block data to the state. Okay, so before doing that, there's one point to note. Generally in the backend, we use the snake case. Okay, that is there you can see image underscore URL, right? That is a snake case notation. Okay, so whereas when it comes to the front end, we make use of the camel case convention. Okay, the naming conventions vary from backend to front end. So in backend, it is snake case, whereas in front end, it is camel case. So when we are setting the block data, right? So we have to make use of the front end naming convention, right? So we have to convert the snake case to camel case. Okay, because in the backend it's snake case, whereas in front end we make use of camel case. So we have to appropriately convert this. Okay, so for that we have written the code there. So data is action array, where in each item we have to update this. So we are using the map. So data.map of each item. So where in each item, so id is colon each item.id, title will be the same. So whereas in case of the image URL, you can see that we have made use of camel case, right? Image URL. So in backend it is image underscore URL. We have appropriately mapped them, right? So with this, we have the updated data, okay, based on the front end convention, okay. So once we print this, you'll be able to see an output in this manner, okay. So let's do this. So here, the data that we have right now, so if you observe, so it's actually in the snake case notation, right? So avatar underscore URL, image underscore URL in this manner. So we have to convert that into camel case, since in front end, we make use of the camel case, okay. So let's do that. So constant updated data. So in the data, it's an array, right? So data.map of, where in for each item. So what we are going to do is we are going to return an object. So where id colon, so each item.id. So you can just have a look at the output and appropriately map them. Okay, so here one is ID, another one is title. So each item dot title. Okay, then we have image URL. So as we understood, the image URL here, it should be in the camel case, right? So there you can see. So each item dot image underscore URL. Okay, similarly there's avatar URL. So each item dot avatar underscore URL. Okay, so what else do we have, right? So we have written ID, and then there's author, topic are left. Okay, let's write those two. So author, so each item dot author, and then there's topic too. So topic, each item dot topic. Okay, so appropriately we have converted the convention and appropriately we have written it here. Okay, so with this we'll have the updated data. So one sec. So here we have to just add a bracket. So that's the thing. So since we have multiple lines, so we have to make use of the bracket. So you can see, right? So now let's just print this updated data. So now there you can see the updated data, right? So let's just expand it. So there you can see, right? So avatar URL, it's in again camel case. Here it's a and camel case like this, right? So appropriately we have updated the naming conventions, right? Okay, so this is done. So we have the updated response data. Now we have to set this data into the state object, right? So firstly, we'll write state. So initially the blocks data would be an empty, right? So we have written an empty array there. Okay, initially we have set it as an empty array, right? So later on, once we have, once the API call is done and we have the updated data, we have to set this state, right? So we are doing that. So this dot set state off and the blocks data with the updated data. Okay, so with this we have updated the state. Then what will happen? The render method will be called, right? So in the render method, we have to access the blocks data from the state, and based on that we have to display, right? So previously we were making use of the dummy data. We can get rid of that. So directly from the state, we are going to get the blocks data and then we will display it. Okay, clear? So now let's try this out. So we have the updated data here, right? So let's first set this into the state. So firstly, I'll define the state here. So it's blocks data, colon. So initially we'll assign an empty array. Okay, so initially it's empty. Later on, once we get it from the API call, so we will set the state off, and then we have the blocks data, colon. So then here we are setting the blocks data as using the updating data. So updated data, right? So we have to update with this. So with this, the render method will be called. So we'll make use of that here. So constant blocks data equal to, so that would be from the state. Okay, so now we have accessed the blocks data from the state, right? So based on this, we are rendering the UI. So we no longer need this dummy data. So I'll just remove this. Okay, so there you can see, right? So initially in the state, so we are maintaining the blocks data. So initially it's empty, right? So later on, so once we have made the API call and we got the data, so we are updating the state. So there you can see we are setting the state with the updated data. So with this, the render method will be called. So then we are accessing the blocks data, and based on that, we are displaying the block items, right? So this is what it's happening. Okay, so now let's have a look at the output. So there you can see, right? So now let me just refresh, and there you can see again. So here we have a list of block items, right? So there you can see, right? Okay, so we got all of this from the API. So appropriately we have made the API call, we have fetched the data, and we are displaying it to the user, right? Okay, so in this manner, so we got the result. Okay, so we are done with these steps, and we were able to see this output, right? So we were able to see a list of blocks, right, appropriately with the data that we have fetched from the API, right? Okay, so we are done with the first two steps, right? So the next thing is we have to show a loader while fetching the data. Okay, so let's see how to do that. So for this, we'll make use of a third-party package, React Loader Spinner. So firstly, let's install that. So npm install React Loader Spinner -- save. This will install this third-party package and also add it to the package.json file. Okay. So now the next thing is we want to import it. So we are going to make use of it in the blocks list component. So firstly, let's import that. So import loader from React Loader Spinner. And also we want to import the corresponding CSS also. So that's the reason we have the next import line. Okay, clear? So with this, the loader has been imported. Okay, so now we have to display the loader. When do we have to display, right? When the API call is in progress, we have to display the loader. When the API call is done, so we shouldn't be displaying the loader, right? So whether to display or not. Okay, so it's varying over the time, right? So let's maintain that in the state object. So is loading colon true. Okay. So initially we'll be making the API call. So that's the reason the default value is true. Okay. So we are setting that in the state. Okay. And then based on this, we have to either display the loader or the blocks list, right? Okay. So there you can see in the render method, we are accessing is loading. Okay. And then based on that, so if the is loading is true, there you can see. So we are making use of that. So and then if it is true, then we have to display the loader. So you can see we have added the loader. So in case is loading is false, so then what do we have to do? We have to display the list of block items, right? So that is what we have written there. Okay, is loading, if it is true, then the loader will be displayed. Otherwise, the blocks list will be displayed. Okay, so let's try this out. So as we understood, when the API call is in progress, we want to add the loader. So for this, we are going to make use of a third-party package. Firstly, let's install that. So npm install React loader spinner. Okay, -- save. So with this, we'll install this third-party package. So there you can see it's done. So we'll make use of this in the blogs list. Okay, so this is the blogs list. So firstly, for that, we need to import it. So I'm importing that. So importing. So import loader from React loader spinner. We also have to import the CSS file. You can find these lines in the resources.md. So there you can see, right? You can find these here. So you can directly copy them. Okay. So here, this is available in the resources.md file. Okay. So we are importing the loader and also the CSS. Now we can make use of this loader component and add the loader. Okay. So another thing is whether to display the loader or not should be controlled, right? And it's changing over the time. So we have to appropriately maintain that in the state, right? So is loading would be initially we'll make the API call. So I'm specifying it as true as the default value. Okay. So now let's access that in the render method. Okay. So is loading. So based on this, either the loader based on is loading, based on this, either the loader should be displayed or the blocks list should be displayed. So let's add that piece of code. Okay. So if is loading is true, okay, we'll make use of the ternary operator. If is loading is true, then the loader should be displayed. So the code to add the loader is also available in the resources.md. You can make use of it. So, well, the loader has to be displayed. In case, if the is loading is false, so then what do we have to do? We have to display the block items, right? So there you can see, right? So firstly, if is loading is true, okay? So if it is true, then we are displaying the loader, right? If it is false, so there you can see colon. So then the blocks data is being displayed, okay? Clear? So we can just get rid of this. So there you can see if is loading is true, then we have the loader, otherwise we have the blocks list. Okay, clear? So now let's have a look at the output. Okay. So let me refresh this. Yeah, 1 second. We have to run npm start, right? So now. So there you can see we have the loader. But actually by now the API call would have been done. But still the loader is there. Why is that? So let's understand. Okay. So here initially is loading is true. But once the API call is done, once we have the data, we have to update this is loading as false. Only then the list of blocks will be displayed, right? So we haven't updated is loading as false, right? So that's the reason. So we always have the loader there. Okay. So now let's update that. Okay. So now once the API call is done, so here we are doing the API call and we are setting the data, right? So the blocks data. So along with this, we also have to mention is loading as false since we already have the data and no more we need the loading part. Okay. So now you can see, right? So I'll just refresh it. So we have the loader and then we have this. Okay, there you can see. Okay. So we are done with adding the loader also. And we have seen that initially there's loader always. So because we haven't set is loading as false. So once we set is loading as false after the API call is done. So appropriately, we were able to see this output, right? So initially there'll be a loader. Once the API call is done, so we are able to see the list of blocks, right? So we are done with today's session. So in today's session, we added an API call. We have seen how to use fetch and make an API call and get the data. Then we have seen how to set this data and appropriately display the UI.